You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Aimee Molloy.
Release day 4. It's called Goodnight Beautiful. And I'll tell you what, Aimee, what an amazing book. From page 1, I was just sucked into the story. And anyway,
Thank you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Aimee, you have such a fascinating story of getting to the place where you are now. And, you were on the show a couple of years ago talking about your book, The Perfect Mother. And we talked a little bit about your journey up to that point. And you have some great stories along the way. But you did this TEDx talk maybe about 5 years ago, talking about how you broke into writing. And I rewatched it again, and it's just so fascinating and so funny, the way that you talk about your journey. What was it that inspired you to? And I'll link that TEDx talk in the show notes so people can watch it and know what we're talking about. But you told about how you had no writing credits to your name, no history that people could judge your work by, and you told about this journey to publishing this book, this first one, and then all of the opportunities that came after that. What was it that drove you in the beginning to know that you wanted to be a writer, even when everything was stacked against you?
Well, I think it was, I was a big reader when I was a kid. It was just the thing that I did more than I did anything else. And, I was just drawn to it from a really young age. And, I was just always writing. I think most writers will say the same thing, but I was always writing. And I kept a journal for years that just every day I probably wrote in a journal. And, it's funny, we moved recently and I have my box of journals and I'm sort of taking small peeks at them. I think someday I might sit down and try and actually read through them. But what I wrote about mostly was about like this desire to write and a fear that I was never going to actually like have the courage to do it, or even just the knowledge of how to do it. This was a time like there was no internet and there was no Google and writing, there was no access to authors the way that there is now. And so I think it was just something that, was this like real passion for me, and this desire to if I didn't do it, I had a weird career path where I ended up getting a master's in urban planning and moving to New York and, working this job that I hated. And I think I was always going to be unhappy if I didn't really give it my best shot. And so it was around turning 30, which, now I look back, I'm like, that was so young, but it doesn't feel young when you're going through it. And, it was, for me, it was like this make or break moment. So that was when I stuck my toe into kind of nonfiction, which felt like an easier path into writing than fiction was. And, it would take me another 15 years before I really sat down and attempted a novel.
That first book with James Yee that you did, Forgotten Country, was an amazing achievement, and the story behind it is absolutely fascinating. And people can watch that talk that you gave where you talk about your journey to that. But you talked about writing nonfiction, and then how it took you a while to get to writing your own fiction. Did you see writing the nonfiction and helping other people tell their story? Did you see that as maybe a way to ease into, by helping other people tell their stories, you're not completely responsible for the story. Was that a way for you to segue to transition in? And let me tag that question with this one: when you got in and writing nonfiction with other people, did you find that just as hard as writing fiction? It seems like it would be easy because you're helping someone else tell their story, but that's not always the case, is it?
Yeah. So, I did give this TED talk that sort of tells the long story of how I sort of got into nonfiction book writing. And for many years, I was a writer. So I was, in nonfiction, it's very common that if you're somebody who has a story to tell, but you're not a writer, you will hire a person who is a writer like me to write the story. And then you will then say that you wrote the book, which is a really bizarre thing that happens all the time in publishing. And, I did that for 15 years. And so I worked with a lot of, some very famous people, some not very famous people, but, very interesting people. And so it was this process, and every book was different, but it was, I would sit down with whoever the subject was and, go very deep into their lives, enough that, these books were really their people's memoirs. And so I was ghostwriting people's memoirs. And some of it was amazing. It was people trusted me with so much stuff. And, and trusted me to tell those stories. And in some ways it was a little bit frustrating because then the work wasn't really mine. It was, it was theirs. And so, it was for me, it did teach me, I think, how to write, because before this, I had never taken a writing course. My main education was just reading. And when I got my first book contract, which, as you said, was with an Army captain named James Yee, who had served at Guantanamo, and it was one of the first inside looks of life at Guantanamo right after it opened. It was I went and got a lot of memoirs, and I just read a lot of memoirs to see how you do it, how do you pace it, and how do you build this arc, and I had no idea what I was doing, and so it was. I learned to do it through writing books. And, in some ways I feel very lucky because I was able to earn money kind of instead of, kind of going to school and paying money. Like I was making money as a writer, and I was learning so much about the craft, and I was constantly reading. And so, yeah, for me, like, I feel like I needed to kind of do that to have the confidence to sit down and write a novel, because, if for anybody who's thinking about writing a novel or who's done it, like you can't actually, if you want to publish a novel, you have to write the entire novel first. And
Right.
It's different with nonfiction. With nonfiction, you could sell a book on a 30-page proposal, but for writing a novel, you have to write the whole thing, and it has to be really good, competing with like all these other writers. And so you have to get the attention of an agent, who then has to get the attention of a publisher. So there's not a lot of room, to kind of screw up. And so, it took me a long time to kind of build that courage to sit down every day and keep writing, knowing that there was a chance that nobody would ever read what I was writing, and that this was all a waste of time. It wasn't going to be good when it was done. And every book that is published, basically, there's a person behind it who has to go through that every single day, and face their demons and face their insecurities. And so, so I think all of that, has led me to this, where now I feel pretty comfortable, like in being a novelist and writing novels and thinking about them, after 20 years, kind of working toward it.
When you published your first novel, The Perfect Mother, it was such a drastic departure from the work that you had been doing. And what a phenomenal book that is, by the way. But what was it like for you to make such a switch in the work that you were doing? Did The Perfect Mother come out of any particular situation, or is this just kind of a story that you'd been thinking about for a while and finally had the opportunity to work on it? What was the genesis of that project?
Yeah. I had my last book that I had ghostwritten. This is tricky because it was for somebody who eventually, like, I wasn't very proud of the work. It was somebody, I mean, I have to be cagey about this, but it was somebody in politics who I eventually ended up feeling a lot of regret about working on their book. And so I think it was a time for me to kind of take a step back and kind of reframe like what I wanted to do. And really it was more about, that I was getting to feel more and more uncomfortable with the idea of somebody putting their name on a book that I had actually written. And, the more experienced I got with it, the more I tried to negotiate that my name would be part of it. And a lot of people were, pushing back on that and saying no. And I think that was really what had happened. And so I had just had my second daughter pretty close, within 2 years, I have 2 kids. And so I think it was this confluence of events of like not really wanting to kind of have somebody take credit for my work, and then having these little girls and wanting to kind of like show them the importance of having a voice. And so what I said to my husband was that the money that I had made from my last ghostwriting book, I was going to kind of claim as my own, and I was going to use it to to hire a babysitter and not take any ghostwriting jobs, but to work on a novel. And so, and everybody had to be okay with it. Like the babies had to be okay with it. My husband had to be okay with it, because this is what I was going to do. I was just going to, I was going to kind of claim 1 year to give a novel a try. And, I think because I had just become a mother, and, the book is set in Brooklyn, and it looks at new motherhood, and specifically about the expectations and the pressures around what you're supposed to do now that you're a woman who has a baby. And I wrote the book in a year, and it was really, looking back, like it was pretty easy for me, because I think that I just didn't think anybody was ever going to read it. It was just going to be, like I would force my husband to read it and my mother, and they would be like, okay, cute. And then like, that would be it. And so it was really freeing. I don't know if I'll ever have that experience again, but, and it ended up having this really weird success where I was able to, get my dream agent and land at my dream publisher. And, the book debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, and it was just nothing like I had ever anticipated. So, and then it was good because I could finally say, and it was funny because actually in the middle of it, I had gotten a call from an editor at Penguin with this ghostwriting job. And it was a great job. It was this female chef, and she was super interesting, and I love food, and I was really excited about this. But I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't start until January, because that was my 1 year deadline for, that I'd given myself for the novel. And so that became this extra thing hanging over me, because they agreed to let me wait. And then, so I think I was supposed to start that job on January 15th, and I sold the book, I think, on like January 4th. And so I had to call them and say, I'm not going to do this book for you now, because I'm doing this novel, which, felt kind of like that was it. That was like, it was good. I was happy that I was able to kind of move, I think, into this new direction, hopefully more permanently.
I'm glad you talked about your journey as a ghostwriter and that decision that you finally had to make about what was right for you. Because while ghostwriting is absolutely a valid form of expression and a form of work for writers, absolutely. But there is that kind of dark side of you're always going to be tied to work that is not all about you, and that you have someone else's life that you're tied to, and you're not in control of the decisions that they make or what comes out later about the realities of their life or what whatever happens, that you're always kind of tied to someone. Those are decisions that you have to weigh out when you become a ghostwriter, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think ghostwriting is a fascinating thing that happens, and I think it's something that we don't understand how prevalent it is, and that basically most 95%, I would say, of famous people who publish books did not write that book. And it's weird to me that we think that just because like you're a famous whatever, that you know how to write a memoir. Like writing a book is a really specific skill that is, like pretty hard most of the time and very unenjoyable. So it's not something that somebody can just like sit down and whip out their, like write down this memoir. And so, but for some reason, we have agreed to accept this idea that there are writers who are unnamed and work without credit, and then other people who then say like, no, I wrote this book. Don't get me wrong, like some books I got paid very well for. Like there are you could make a good living doing that. And so I'm certainly not, like, you know what you're getting into. But I do think it would be a better system if ghostwriters were given credit, and some of them are, and but yeah. And then whatever happens with that book, and that person, then you write it, you hand it off, then that person kind of runs with it. And again, for most of the time, I wrote this book called Jansen's Gift with a woman named Pam Cope, who is now just like a sister to me. And, she was not famous. Her story is that she lost her son unexpectedly when he was a teenager. And she ended up kind of using her grief to, to work with kids in West Africa who had been sold into slavery, and to, rescue them. And she now runs this incredible complex in Ghana where kids are educated, and she has rescued hundreds of kids. And her story, I think, is just like a beautiful gift. And her book, it's just one of my favorite books ever. And so most of it was just, it's really it's a privilege to work with people and to be able to tell their story. But I do think it's tricky with some people that there could be, we could kind of be more open about giving credit to writers in those situations.
Papyrus Author was designed and developed with the modern writer's needs, wishes, and preferences in mind. From big structures right down to tiny details, every single feature of our software has been carefully and meticulously crafted in collaboration with authors. Take charge of your writing with the author interface, which gives you access to different elements of your story, such as characters, backgrounds, and narrative structure. Move sections of your writing seamlessly in the navigator and evaluate the complexity of your text with our expert style and readability analysis. Never worry about losing progress with automated backups. With Papyrus Author, you can be your own writer, editor, and publisher. The world of writing is about to change. Papyrus Author, the word processor for authors, has arrived on the international stage. Unrivaled in its scope, it is the first software suite to unite every single step of creative writing. The vision behind Papyrus Author is to empower everyone with an idea to turn it into a great book for free. A word processing core that matured for over 10 years at its foundation, Papyrus Author goes beyond the text with its intuitive organizing layers for story, characters, notes, and research. The powerful style and readability analysis help raise manuscript quality. The inbuilt publication capabilities take the book directly to the reader with ebooks, docx, and print-ready PDF. Visit papyrusauthor.com to get started today. Do you want to get paid to write stories? Do you enjoy collaborating with other talented storytellers? Do you want to work completely remotely and set your own hours? Relay Publishing is looking for writers and editors to work on fiction projects across a range of genres, from thrillers to sci-fi, fantasy, and romance. The Relay process is extremely collaborative, in the same vein as a TV show's writer's room. If you're a story geek, then you'll be on a great team. There are 7 ghostwriting positions and 10 editing positions currently available. Please go to www.recruitment.relaypub.com. That's www.recruitment.relaypub.com for more information on how to apply. Join a great storytelling team today.
For sure. Aimee, you talked about when you were writing The Perfect Mother, this feeling of freedom, my words, not yours, that you felt in writing this book, and that this was going to be your project, but no one was expecting it. maybe your husband was going to read it, your mother, and everybody would have a good time with it. But there was no pressure on the book. When you turned that book in and sold it and realized that okay, this is going to be a thing. On the other side of that first draft life, where the book then goes into editing, and you're dealing with a publisher who's going to ask you to make some adjustments here and there, and the process that we all go through in taking that book from our computer to published life. Did you find that process different when you turned in your novel than when you turned in a ghostwriting job? Was it different, and was it difficult on the other side of that initial writing process?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, probably only in that I didn't have as much of an investment in the ghostwriting that I was doing. So if the editor was like, "You should change this," I was usually like, "Okay," and
Right.
and whoever I was working with kind of would have a strong opinion about that sometimes. But I mean, my editor at Harper is a woman named Jennifer Barth, and she's really good, and she has made my books so much better. And so I'm really happy to have her input on stuff, and so I think it's good. I think I think there's this misconception that I hear often that editors no longer edit, and I haven't found that to be true. I think Jennifer she's very good at seeing the flaws, and seeing like the weird things I do in my writing that just weighs down the prose. And so I am really always happy to put in it, and I'm lucky in that way.
I can't remember when we talked last time because The Perfect Mother was just coming out. But Kerry Washington has attached herself that this is coming to the big screen. Where is that in the world right now?
I don't know. I think everything has sort of been put on hold with this virus. So
Yeah.
they had the option for a while. So I'm still hoping. I would love to see what she does with the story, but I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Aimee, after The Perfect Mother and you launched, your novel writing career, and everyone loves the book, and it's a huge success. Then Goodnight Beautiful comes out. When did this story idea come to you?
For Goodnight Beautiful, yeah. It is actually a funny story. So I, had, oops, sorry, my beeping, but
That's okay.
I never know how to turn these off. But so I had been living in New York, and this was probably 15 years ago, and I had decided that I wanted to start to see a therapist, and it was completely like out of normal. Like, I was raised Irish Catholic. Like, you don't go to therapy, you just kind of deal,
You're right.
you eat your meat,
Grind through it.
everything's going to be fine. And so I went to an acquaintance of mine named Mark, who is a therapist. And I said to him, "How do you find a therapist?" And he said, "You should go to my therapist. She's amazing. This woman named Judith." And so I went to Judith, and I said to her, Mark, me. I assume this is not going to matter because he will never come up in therapy for me. Like, he's just some guy I know. And she was like, "No, it's fine. Don't worry about it." And then 3 years later, I start to like have a real crush on Mark. And so we were still seeing the same therapist. And so I had this idea at the time that I would, like, on the way out one day, like, hide in a closet and just listen in on his therapy sessions to see if he was talking about me, to see if he, also was saying that he liked me. And of course I never did it, but I really wanted to do it. And so we eventually started dating. And I said, I told him the story that I was like, "Oh yeah, I always wanted to hide in the closet to see if you were talking about me." And, and we were like, "Oh, wouldn't that be a funny idea for a novel?" And so, I remember, like, we would be like, "Oh yeah, this is what would happen." And it's like, it was this cleaning person who was like hiding in a closet at a therapy office. And we had this whole thing about this novel, and I was not writing fiction at the time. And so fast forward, now 20 years later, and Mark and I are married with 2 children, and he is still a therapist. And after I wrote The Perfect Mother, I went back and said, do you remember that idea we had about somebody listening in on therapy sessions? And, like, what could I do with that? And I started to kind of just play around with that idea of like a woman listening in on a husband's therapy sessions based on that. So, and what is actually quite funny is that, the book in the Goodnight Beautiful, Sam is the therapist, and him and his wife, Annie, leave New York and they move to the country, and he has a home office. And there's a vent through which everything can be heard upstairs. And so what's funny is that we have since moved to the country, and Mark used to go and, commute to New York a couple days a week to keep his practice. But since the virus, he has actually been working in the basement, seeing patients over Zoom. And there is actually a vent in our house through which I can now, if I wanted to, listen in on his therapy sessions. So I promise I don't. But it is very funny how we've kind of come full circle with this.
That's hilarious. To see real life seeping into a novel. So you have that idea, but when did these characters kind of walk onto the stage? So you've got this idea, and wouldn't that be funny? And I could see how this would happen. But when did the story embody these characters?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's also, this is, it's a hard book to talk about because there's some pretty big twists in it that are, it's hard, you don't want to give away. But the process with Goodnight Beautiful is that after The Perfect Mother came out, I had written about 100 pages. And so we decided to take those to the publisher and to Jennifer, to my editor, and she liked it. She liked this idea. And the book was called The Hiding Place at the time. And it was a similar premise. It was a husband and wife. They moved to the country. The wife is upstairs listening in on the husband's therapy sessions. And so I sold the book on 100 pages, but, I still had 200 pages to write. And so I sat down and I can't remember what I had, 6 months or something to finish it. And a couple weeks before the book was due, I was really struggling with it. I just thought it was like, it was not what I wanted for my second novel. It felt very quiet and not really original. And I had this idea pop into my head for one of the characters, who I won't mention who, so I don't spoil it for anybody. And it was a rethinking of the book. Same premise. It was still a husband and wife who moved to the country, and they're still listening in on the therapy session, but everything was sort of shifted. And I think part of this is that at the time, the wife, her name was Beth. Now it's Annie, but she was a little hysterical, and she wasn't totally believable, and you were not supposed to know like what, she was this very unreliable narrator. And Me Too was happening, and it was kind of growing and gaining importance. And I was thinking a lot about this idea of the fact that so many women are not believed. And I was struggling really a lot with writing this character who was like another woman who we were, telling people she couldn't be believed. And like, is she crazy, or what's her problem? And is she telling the truth, or is she not? And I think like living through Me Too and writing this character just started to feel very unsettling to me. And so this idea popped into my head of literally like a character popped into me. And so I was 3 weeks away from turning the book in. It was, we had a cover, we had we had a publication date. And I remember I emailed my agent, and Elizabeth Weed, who I love. And I was like, hey, just hypothetically speaking, if you sell a book and you're 3 weeks away from the deadline, and you decide that you have a better idea, but it's going to require basically throwing out this book and rewriting it, like, is that okay? And like, she didn't get back to me, and so 2 hours later, I was like texting her. I was like, hey, I think we need to talk. And I was like, maybe this is like, and I kept being like, pushed out of my head. It's not I can't do this. And then by like 4, I had her on the phone, and I was like, okay, big problem. And, and that was on a Friday. And then by Monday, we were at lunch with Jennifer, and we were presenting this new idea to her and saying like, this is a better book, and this is, a bigger book. And she was incredibly gracious and generous. And she said, okay, I'm going to trust that you know what you're doing. And Harper gave me another year to finish it. And so I had to like go back, and I literally threw away that book and like started over with these different characters. And, I don't regret it. It was a lot of work. If I had known it meant that I was going to publish this like during a pandemic, like before 2 weeks election, I probably would have rethought it. But I do think that it was the right move.
One thing that I find fascinating is you talk about the character of Annie, and you said at the time she, had a different name. She was, did you say Bess or Beth?
Yeah.
Is a character more than a name? When they're on the page, when you're writing them, do they become fully formed people? Because when you talk about them, this character used to be called this, but it sounds like she's a completely different character. Does the name, is it more than just that? Do they become completely different people? And I don't feel like I'm getting the gist of my question, but it sounds like you're talking about real people, and that just because you change their name doesn't mean you change them, but it sounds like they're different. They live differently on the page.
Yeah, totally. And these were very different characters. Like, it really was like throwing away this one character and writing a different one. Because like Annie, who is in Goodnight Beautiful, like, and it is weird because I do talk about her like she's real, but like, she's super smart, and she's really independent and bullheaded, and she knows what she wants, and like she doesn't put up with anybody's bullshit. And and my other character was the opposite of that. She was kind of like weak and like afraid of like losing her husband, and I really kind of, I think, turned the whole, a lot of wanting to throw this away was like I didn't really want to write that character. Like she wasn't that interesting to me, and she felt like she was just like you've read her before. You've read the desperate woman who's afraid of her husband leaving. And, what ended up emerging was the Annie Potter, who's in Goodnight Beautiful, and she's, she's married to Sam, and he is this very, kind of alluring and charming and handsome doctor. And, but she's not afraid of losing him. It's actually the opposite. Like when they first meet, she's like, I promise, like, I will only give you 6 months. Like, that's all I will offer. Like, don't get your hopes up that this is going to be a long-term thing. Cause I don't do that, because men are pretty boring, and like Sam is, sort of determined to kind of change her mind because he really likes her. And so we kind of, I think, flips a lot of like the gender stereotypes on its head. And and they have this, Sam and Annie have this weekly tradition of they celebrate their anniversary every week. And you kind of assume, I think, that that's her idea. And then you find out that it's actually his, because he's so excited that like he has her, that he just wants to celebrate like another week of marriage with her. And so yeah, it was, I'm names are hard for me. I think like I can write for a while. Even this book, I'm working on something now, and I don't actually know her name. And, I think it has to, I spent a lot of time on nameberry.com, like, how to name your baby. And, I kind of scroll through that for a while to try and see if something sticks out for me. But I find names to be kind of hard.
One thing that I found really interesting is in looking at the Amazon page for the book, Goodnight Beautiful. Someone said, from master of clever misdirection, Aimee Molloy. How do you feel about being kind of getting this reputation for being a master of clever misdirection?
I don't know. It's a little weird that I do that. Like my husband's like, like, but yeah, I sort of enjoy that. I think like kind of like tricking readers and, playing a lot with people's assumptions.
Yeah.
And that, so I don't know.
Well, and you do it from the very beginning. From the very beginning in chapter 1, that is a misdirection that resolves pretty quickly, and you let the reader into that first chapter, and it's kind of a funny misdirection, but yet it kind of sets the stage for what is coming for the rest of the book.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that it's kind of fun with that because, I feel like if you read that chapter closely, like there's a lot of hints in there that will eventually sort of play out in a bigger way throughout the book. So that was, it was that first scene that sort of, I think that sort of spurred me to write the book, was like the idea of leading a reader down a path and then like switching it pretty quickly in the first chapter was like something that was pretty fun to do.
Well, it's become very popular in thrillers, and especially domestic thrillers or psychological thrillers, to sort of take this Gillian Flynn note of the unreliable narrator and pulling the rug out from under readers, and when done cheaply and you can only pull off that sort of trick so many times before the readers just kind of roll their eyes and, so, well, there was that trick again. But you don't allow us to let our guard down enough to get caught up by these easy tricks. How is it that you keep us guessing and keep moving the story around so that it does feel natural and it feels fresh each time you do it? Do you ever worry about coming up against what's popular in fiction right now, and how do you steer away from just your writing becoming cliche, even though it still is jarring for the reader? How do you keep that fresh?
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a nice compliment, but I don't know. And I think I write a book and then I throw it away because that was how I felt, and that was actually like the exact problem that I had with that first version of this book, was that to me, it felt like the same version of, 20 other books that would be published, this time. And, I don't know, and I think that there's, it could have worked. I think like there are readers who like to kind of have these experiences of, like kind of trying to figure stuff out and figuring out some of it, not other parts of it. But I think that I was a little just worried about, I think, getting pigeonholed in my own head, that this is the kind of writer that I was going to be and that this was going to be my career. And I think a lot of it had to do with, when I took my first ghostwriting job in 2003, I thought this is going to be a great project to do for the next year and a half. And I ended up doing it for 15 years, and my agent at the time, I kept saying to her, like, I would like to write a novel. And she was like, but you're a ghostwriter. And so, and I was young and inexperienced, and, and I was like, you're right. And I think I want to avoid that wherever my career takes me in the next however many years, like 20 years, is, I don't know, but I want to be very careful about not having my own expectations that I'm a certain type of writer and that's what I'm going to have to produce. And I think that, I was, I'm doing some interviews and people are like, why are you a thriller writer? And I'm like, I don't think I'm a thriller writer. Like I'm no more a thriller writer than I am a nonfiction writer or a ghostwriter. It's just, that's what these two books have been. So, I don't know. I think that a third book feels, that's a really important time in possibly like in a novelist's life, because it's, I think, the time where you have some, I don't know, it's like you're at a crossroads here. Like, are you gonna keep going in one direction, or are you gonna kind of take a risk and try something else? And I think that I might be leaning towards trying something else. So, and probably because of that, I don't want to be known as the master of clever misdirection for the next 15 years. Like, I would like to see what else I could do.
Well, to be known as that for right now is pretty exciting, and I love everything that you're doing. Goodnight Beautiful is available everywhere today. Go grab your copy, Kindle edition, hardback, audiobook. There are links to all of those in the show notes where you can grab them. Aimee, if people are just learning about you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
Well, I have a website, aimeemolloy.com. And I'm at Instagram at Aimee Molloy 718, where I like to post photographs of tomatoes and stuff.
Great. We'll put links to those in the show notes as well. Goodnight Beautiful. Go grab your copy today. Aimee, thank you so much for taking time to come back on the show.
Thank you, Hank. It's always so nice to talk to you.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called Pubsite. Pubsite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. Pubsite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates. Pubsite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, Pubsite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. Pubsite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. Pubsite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. Pub-site.com, the place to help authors find their home on the web. You ever wonder if a person's critical thinking comes at the expense of their own happiness? Is it possible to be very happy and still practice excellent discernment? I used to wonder the same thing. Then I discovered the Trouble in Paradise podcast with Nigel Kent and Jasmine Starr, where they laugh as well as think about conspiracy theories and unexplained phenomena without ever getting bogged down in the age-old tug-of-war between logic and feeling. The Trouble in Paradise podcast is a joyful program for critical thinkers who have a sense of humor. Join Nigel and Jasmine as they probe the intriguing and wacky culture of odd occurrences, strange news, and ridiculous coincidences on this hilariously intelligent podcast. Trouble in Paradise on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Stitcher. Follow at Tipcast239 on Twitter. Trouble in Paradise with Nigel Ken and Jasmine Starr, a happy podcast for critical thinkers like you.